everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys about some simple solutions for lagging shoulder development. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And guys, when we talk about this, we need to be realistic. We need to put this in perspective. If you feel that your shoulders are lagging compared to some guy who's been blasted anabolics for 3, 4, 5 years and has 35 pounds of muscle mass on you, yes, your shoulders are going to be smaller than his. And no, there's literally nothing you can do in the gym that will ever get you on par with his shoulder development. So when I'm talking about shoulder development, I'm talking about guys who it's actually lagging. It's actually a weak point to you relative to your entire body. Also, what people need to remember, shoulder development has become a bigger topic out there for guys training because of so many guys on gear. Anabolics in general tend to have a slightly more pronounced effect on the delts, the traps, the upper chest, because there are more androgen receptors in those parts of the body. So accordingly, guys who use stuff, those areas tend to develop easier than other muscle groups, even though all of their muscles are going to grow from the stuff that they're taking. But they're going to tend to be slightly disproportionate there. Then to compound things and make it even worse, most of these pro bodybuilders out here are literally injecting stuff into their shoulders. All right, so it's really giving a disproportionate idea of what's proportionate. So accordingly, a lot of people who might be reasonably balanced will still feel, due to the proportions that are now the expectation, they're going to feel that they're lagging a bit. So in that case, sometimes some extra shoulder work might be warranted, even for people who are natural, just so that they can feel like they have the proportions and stuff that we're talking about out there. Also, having big, strong shoulders isn't a bad thing for, again, anything physical sports, particularly where you've got to push stuff, lift stuff over your head. And, you know, for just a lot of different activities in general, hey, it's not a bad idea to have big, strong shoulders. So we shouldn't knock it. Now, a couple of reasons that a lot of guys end up with lagging shoulders is because of, again, too much time spent on the wrong exercises. It is about the wrong exercise selection. And a lot of it has to do with just not enough pulling. Right? They're just not doing enough pulling with their upper and middle back, and therefore things like rear delts, traps, and in some cases that can even contribute to less side delt development. Because you have to remember, and what a lot of physiologists have pointed out, you know, everyone wants to do all this direct work for the side delts and all this stuff, but the thing is, that head of the delt is not really intended to move weight as a main primary mover. It's not really intended structurally to do that. That's not a normal pattern that we do, and that's why such light weight has to be used when you do that. It's not a really big head of a muscle. It can lift weight directly. It's not necessarily intended in normal movement patterns to do so. So it does tend to get a lot of secondary emphasis on anything that works the front delt, and anything that works the rear delt, it does get a lot of secondary emphasis. And the problem is that a lot of guys are interior dominant. They don't do enough pulling and things. They don't do enough deadlifting. They don't do enough pull-ups, chin-ups, heavy rows, snatches, cleans, things like that. That alone is one of the reasons you see a lot of imbalances. And then worst of all, these guys who have these shoulder days, what do? How many of them do all their overhead pressing seated on some sort of incline? Or they do it in a Smith machine? Or, you know, again, they do dumbbells on a mild incline. Well, that completely de-emphasizes the rest of the shoulder girdle. That takes that press and makes it, which is already a somewhat interior dominant exercise still, for the anterior deltoid, it makes it more so. And it reduces the amount of shoulder girdle development you're getting and puts more emphasis back on the upper chest and on the front delt more. So realistically, anyone sitting around doing these on an incline bench of any type, or even seated in general, because when you're seated, you tend to try to lean back and press against the pad, even when you're on one that's perfectly upright and isn't an incline. All right, so one of the biggest tips you can do is that if you're going to do any overhead pressing, do it standing. And that way, when you're doing it standing, you can lean back at the bottom to get more chest and everything, and then you can push through as the bar starts to come up. And that will greatly enhance your entire shoulder girdle. And, you know, it will make it a better overall exercise because, again, it will work your core and everything more. But it will allow a more complete use of the shoulder girdle. And that's been noticed on EMGs have noticed that. EMGs have also caught that even standing presses like that tend to even use a little bit more tricep. They use more of the entire shoulder girdle. So that's one of your fixes right there. I'll quit doing all these silly shoulder days with all this seated dumbbell work and everything else, or seated barbell work or seated Smith machine work. Start doing shoulder presses standing. That's your first key. Number two, you probably do need to do more pulling. You're probably doing a lot of benching, a lot of arms, a lot of triceps, but you're not really doing enough pulling for your upper back. So what I would look at is go through and look at all the pulling exercises you do that do work that and compare it to your pressing exercises, and that includes all your benching, your dips, your overhead pressing, and make sure that there's a proportionate amount. In other words, if you do 10 sets of bench press or dips and 10 sets of overhead pressing every week, but all your combined pulls, whether it's rows, pull-ups, snatches, things like that, if you're only doing about 10 to 15 sets, you guys see the math here, you're doing 20 versus 10 to 15, that's not going to work. That's partially an imbalance because you're not getting enough of the rear delt work and all the trap work involved with that. That is going to carry over to less work even on the side delt, even as a secondary muscle. So that's something that you need to look at also is the proportion of pulling versus pushing you're doing. And again, we're just talking about people who won't balance there. I'm not talking about competitive bodybuilders. It's not my topic. It will not really be a topic I discuss here. If you're going to go compete in bodybuilding, go hire a bodybuilding coach. It's not my wheelhouse. I'm not interested in it. But I am talking about the average guy who wants to gain a lot of muscle and a lot of strength, and they want to be somewhat proportionate. Because you guys got to remember, being proportionate also prevents injuries to some extent. You know, having major muscle imbalances, whether they're left to right, front to back, that can contribute to injuries, and we don't want to get hurt. We all want to be strong, fit, athletic. We don't want to be injured and beat up. Exercise that for people who have really, really healthy shoulders. Now, if you have a history of shoulder impingement and stuff, I'm not going to recommend this, but you guys have heard me recommend this before. You've heard Eric Bugenhagen recommend this before, Alec and Curie. There's a lot of people out there who do this. I've even seen, what's his name? Thibodeau over at T-Nation. I don't necessarily always like T-Nation. Has recommended this, the snatch grip high pull. So if you have really healthy shoulders, no history of impingement or shoulder injury, the snatch grip high pull, if you have lagging shoulders, will work wonders. So this is another thing to consider. Once you've addressed those other things, you stop doing any sort of seated pressing. You're adding more pulling work. Snatch grip high pulls. It's a fantastic, heavy, full body exercise that will put muscle and strength into a lot of parts of your body, but will put a heavy, heavy emphasis on your entire shoulder girdle, all the heads of the delt, the traps, all of that. It will work it tremendously. So for those of you with really healthy shoulders, or you have the extra recovery to handle another big compound, that would be worth doing. In fact, if anything, you could pull some of your other fluff out for it. Pull some of your fluff out for it. Now, for other people who maybe don't have the recovery, or you do have a history of shoulder issues, base pulls with bands. Base pulls with bands. Tons of sports physical therapists recommend these as a rehab exercise. They recommend them as a prehab exercise. All right? And then you go look at the data that Brett Contreras did on these. And I'm not saying EMG studies are the be-all, end-all. What did he find as far as shoulder development? He found that base pulls done with a band, of all things, hit some of the highest muscle activation of any exercise he could find for both the rear and the side heads of the deltoid. In addition to being a good rotator cuff exercise, traps, helping you with better scapular retraction if you work on them, which can carry over to bench pressing and other stuff, it worked the posterior and the side head of the deltoid more than isolation movements did. In addition to being, again, a very valued prehab and rehab exercise. So something to consider there, particularly if you have a history of shoulder issues. I mean, if you have a history of shoulder issues and you have lagging shoulders, this is a no-brainer. This is an exercise you should probably be doing a lot more of. So that would be my final suggestion out of all these different tips for people with lagging shoulders would be base pulls with bands. Base pulls with bands. Do them and do them regularly. That alone, for a lot of you out there, would probably resolve the issue, but you do probably want to address those other imbalances and things going on as well. But this one is kind of an easy fix, that it's easy to do. It's easy to just carry bands with you and do these. You can do them at home. You can do them at the gym. You just need a pole or something to wrap the band around. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.